flood insurance is really it's one of those areas that causes a lot of problems simply because there's confusion around that definition of when do you have a refinance, when do you have a modification, because flood is one of those that it gets triggered regardless. If you have a modification or refinance, you may be dealing with flood. So look at the definition here. Also want to make sure we keep in mind flood insurance, it's consumer loans and commercial loans. So there's no exception for commercial loans are out there. It's in either type of loan if it's secured by a walled and roofed structure. Okay, there's a structure on real estate and it's secured by a walled and roofed structure. Now we're playing the flood game. And so, but if you look at the definition, there isn't a definition of refinance here. Look at what it says here. So it's a definition, sort of. And what it says is a bank shall not make, so let's talk about refinance. It shall not refinance. And then it says it shall not make. And if you're making a new loan, it's refinance. Remember, we're tearing up the old one and we're replacing it with the new one. Increase, extend, or renew. So if it's increasing, extending, or renew, that's a modification. That could be a modification, right? You could have a modification to increase a loan, or you could have a modification to renew it, or you could have a modification to increase the amount that's loaned. That's what we call a Meyer event. And if you have a Meyer event, we're starting over with flood. And when I say, flood, it could be, and if we're in a refinance situation, that's making a new loan every single time. And the flood requirements, if you're doing a refinance, we've got to follow all these rules. We have to go through and we have to have a special flood hazard determination form. Now, you could rely on an old one. Maybe your bank does, but you need to make sure that the old one follows the rules. You can rely on previous determination forms, but only if it's less than 7 years and there's specific ifs, ands, or buts in there. So if you think you're relying on the previous one, you might want to double check to make sure that the previous determination form is still good. Now, maybe you pull a new one every time, or maybe the old one's not good anymore. You need to make sure you get a new one. Okay. The next thing is the flood notice. So if it turns out that they are in a flood zone, you need to give them this notice, and it has to be a reasonable amount of time in advance of closing. So about 10 days, so they can shop around for flood insurance. Now you may be saying, wait a minute, what if this is a refinance, right, Kev? So aren't they already in a flood zone? Don't they already have flood insurance? Why do I have to give them a notice again? They already know it. They've already got the insurance. And the answer is, it doesn't matter. You still have to give them a new notice every time you refinance that loan, or really every time you have a new Meyer event and they are in a flood zone. Now, you have to go through and recalculate the amounts and coverage, make sure you have adequate amount in place. And then, you may trigger the requirement to escrow. Maybe you're already escrowing and you need to go through and make sure that everything is still being escrowed appropriately. Or it could be a situation where maybe this is a refinance from before we had to have flood insurance escrowed. And if that's the case, you may trigger the requirement. They may not be escrowing right now, and you may be escrowing going forward with this refinance. So make sure you understand those rules as well.